We are in one of the best Formula One seasons ever. We have to understand Max probably is the best driver ever in F1. I don't think anyone in the grid would beat Max. It's in a different dimension.
Enjoying this season? It's pretty good one if you're still watching.
Yeah, of course I am. I'm actually doing a podcast here in Spain with, not sure if you're familiar with Albert Fábrega. He's
Okay.
a well-known engineer, ex-mechanic also in Formula One. And I really enjoy doing it because, I think we are in one of the best Formula One seasons ever, or at least the closest or the most compressed between the teams. And I think it's just great because you just can't see drivers struggling to get these tires to work, and drivers fighting for position, and you see all the race pace between teams and drivers very close to each other. So I think it's we are in this Formula One, which is a bit more human and a little bit less, technologic, even though aerodynamics still make the difference. But yeah, I think it's one of the most fun to watch ever. So yeah, I think it's great.
Not to be negative, but do you share the concerns a bit with the rule changes next year? It might mess it up again a little bit, or do you think the racing's naturally closer?
So I think just in general, I'm I think 4 years period of regulations are great because this gets the teams to develop new parts, new areas of development of the car. And it's just great that now Formula One gets into a new dimension of rules change, especially aerodynamics. I think cars nowadays have too much grip. On dry conditions or predictable conditions, these cars are way too easy to drive. Obviously not physically because they're really quick. Like their minimum speed in the corners is just insane. It's crazy. But yeah, if you just watch an onboard on the dry, it looks like Scalextric. The drivers are not struggling for grip. Of course, in the wet or humid conditions on intermediates or full wet, it's another story. They're very difficult. There's a lot of power. The tires are huge. I've never seen these huge tires on the rear. So there's so much grip on these cars. I would go for another direction, which I think 2026 is gonna be great on that, which is less grip, more struggling for grip, maybe more tire degradation. Drivers will be more on hand of their decisions, and they will be handling the car in a different way, and they will be driving in a different way as well. So I think in general, less weight. I think that these cars are way too heavy. You can see that the mass and the weight transfers of the car, it's just too high. So next year it's gonna be lighter. It's gonna be more like the old days, which is great. I would still change the sound of these cars, go back to the V8s or the V10s, which I know is now a topic of discussion. Because Formula One is an entertainment, and now that fans are very engaged with the sport, which is great, I would definitely go back to these goosebumps, goosebumps sounds that makes people jump and go around because it's Formula One and it has to be a great show.
Yeah.
So yeah, all in all, I think 2026 rules, I think it's gonna be a step forward for the show, and it's gonna be great for the drivers to be challenged with the racing.
You talk about the fan base growing. Is how much has it changed in Spain? Because obviously it blew up with Fernando Alonso, but now with Drive to Survive and everything, is it getting bigger and bigger in Spain? Like, look at you guys obviously have so much success in so many sports and MotoGP as well, but is it continuing to grow with Alonso and
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. I think Liberty have done a great job here. I think they've understood something that maybe was misunderstood before, that besides the racing and besides the motorsport kind of romantic point of view, this has to be a show, an entertainment show for the fans, for the people, like the NBA, like other sports too. They live, and the world changes and it develops very quick, very fast. And And this has to be a show for the fans, for the people to have fun, to go to the racetrack and enjoy every single minute of it. And I think Liberty have really understood how to get involved into this. Maybe also COVID helped, just because the TV show, a reality show indeed, of Drive to Survive was a screen showed during that time, that period of time, which obviously helped the people to be engaged with understanding how the dynamics of Formula One teams and Formula One works. And now you can see there's a different crowd, like there's much more kids and young people involved into the Formula One world. There's much more female spectators in the show. And all in all, I think it's just great. People talking around Formula One, and that there's a lot of unknowledge, of course, because Formula One is a quite technical sport. It's not like football, or let's say something that you can actually see with your eyes what is going on. There's a lot of behind the screens in Formula One, and a lot of factory and technical stuff going on, with the engineering point of view and the aerodynamics and mechanical point of view. But it's also great for us to explain to the new people in the sport. And as you said, in Spain, it's also huge, even though we don't have now both of Spanish drivers in the very top. But even though it's a very followed sport, and it's a well-known sport, and it's getting bigger, and I think it's great. And I wish this happened when I was driving in F1. So yeah, in general, it's great. I think so.
And obviously, the biggest story, it's interesting what you said at the start about the window the drivers are having to get into. That sort of brings us on to what's happening with Liam Lawson. It seems him and Red Bull have both said his struggle has been finding the operating window for the car. There's reports, I think, from Germany, Netherlands, seems like everywhere now, that he's going to be swapped. What do you make of that? Is it just 2 races in? Is it? Yeah.
I think it's not a very it's not a short answer, because first of all we have to analyze what it is to be Max's teammate.
Yeah.
We have to understand Max probably is the best driver ever in F1. And that's because of his whole education, because his whole experience, his whole mindset, which maybe that would lead to another answer and another question, which is unbelievable to see this kid doing what he did in Australia, and especially driving not the best car at all in the grid. So this is something out of, I would say, every driver's dimension. So whoever you put on this car besides Max is not going to look great. Probably would look a bit closer, but I don't think anyone in the grid would beat Max. So let's start with this mindset. Secondly, we have to understand that Liam Lawson is not a bad driver, not a bad driver at all. He's quite new to Formula One, and you have to give him time. You have to give him time to know the tracks. There was very little time in China, especially because it was a sprint race, sprint qualifying. The tire windows, these Pirelli tires, they're really, really specific to make them work. If you don't get these tires into the right temperature window, you just don't have the grip. You see his onboards in Australia, and this guy was struggling for grip massively. While you see Max onboard, he had grip everywhere, front, rear, traction, combined traction, lateral grip. And Liam was just struggling to find the grip because he didn't have the tires in the operating window. So if you don't, and it's not just Liam, just all the drivers that have a lot of experience, if they don't find the right window for whatever reason, car setup, bringing the tires in the right condition in the outlap or whatever, if you don't take these tires into the right operating window, you're nowhere, and it's so easy to gain or lose 4, 5 tenths. So I would say, I know how Red Bull works because I've been there, and Helmut and Christian, and they push for pressure and for performance, which is, their way of doing it. And I think it's just great because, they try to get the maximum out of their drivers. But my point of view is that you have to give this kid a little bit of time. I don't personally think that he will beat naturally Max, because I think Max has it's in a different dimension. But as I said, it's not just Liam; it's just against everyone. But I'm 100% convinced that Liam will perform with a little bit more time, much better than what he did. It's just the first two races, give him a little bit of time, and maybe take some pressure off his head, because I think the worst thing to do in F1 is just compare yourself to your teammate, to read the press, to see all these rumors going on about you. It happened to me as well in the past. And the best way you can do is just focus on yourself, on your performance, on the way that you think it will take you forward, and just keep pushing and keep working. That I'm sure he'll get closer. So I think that's what we can see at the moment. And yeah, that's just look at the positives, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And it seemed as well that Max was even aware of that. I saw an interview in China saying that he thinks Liam would be faster in a racing bulls because the car is so difficult to drive. Do you buy into the theory that it's maybe too biased towards him? I remember an interview with Alex Albon saying he used to love oversteer. He thought he was a really oversteery driver, and then when he got in the Red Bull, he was like, "Wow, Max is on a whole different level when it comes to this."
Well, you know, there's this whole story that the car is built around Max. There's there's no engineer in the world that builds a car for a certain driving style. We all drivers know that an understeering car is definitely slower than a slightly pointy oversteering car. That's crystal clear since you drive in Formula Ford or Formula 3 or Formula 4 or whatever. But then during the weekend, you just develop your setup with your engineer, with weight transfers, with springs, with you know, the height of the car, and then you have your driving style. It's crystal clear that Max has a very pointy driving style and a very certain driving style, which he has developed during years and experience and knowledge, which is unbelievable. The way he drives and the way you know, he just performs. Nobody is able, and I want to be very clear with that. Nobody is able to cope with the problems that Max might be able to feel. Let's say he starts to feel graining on the front left and starts to feel understeer, and the way he handles certain situations, certain problems with his car, nobody is able to cope with those problems as he does. So let's understand this for real. It's not that Red Bull has developed a car that only fits this kind of driving style. No, you are able to go in that car, but then you have to understand how to drive this car. Max understands how to drive every single situation under every single circumstance, because he has been trained and he has the talent enough to feel every single sensation for finding grip in an incredible and such an unbelievable way that nobody is able to feel and find. So that's one of the reasons. Of course, then you jump in and you might be smoother than Max. You have a slightly different driving style than him. You try to compensate with a little bit of understeer, and you're going to be slower. So that's my point of view on things about what's going on inside Red Bull or inside any single team or every single car that Max would drive, because he knows a pointy front end with a slightly rear loose is going to make him quicker.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to hear it from a driver's perspective, because obviously you do hear a lot of talk about the car. Is it as well?
You know, it's always a question of balance.
Yeah, okay.
When you have an unbalanced car, you feel it like this.
Yeah.
And he's just able to drive with every kind of situation or problem in a better way than anybody else, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's a simple answer, you know.
So it's a combination of his speed and also his intelligence of the setup.
Skills,
Yeah.
intelligence, manage how he reads the car, how he feels the car, how he manages the tires, the race, how he performs when he's out of the car, and understands the dynamics. It's a lot. Formula One, it's a lot of work going out behind the scenes. You know, when you take your helmet off, you go back to the factory and you want to make sure, how do you want this car to be happening, and how do you want this car to be set it up, and how do you understand the dynamics of the car when you are out of the car. So there's a lot of things going on when you remove your helmet, you know.
Yeah. And there's something I was interested in as well, maybe going back to your early career, from a driver's perspective, how do they spot that? Because obviously Red Bull have this tradition of bringing through new drivers. What do they look for, and how does it come about? Is
That's
it like
that
a football scout, and how does it happen?
that's a very good question. Like during my period in F1, honestly, I really, really, really struggled because we had the tools and we had the technology that we had. I mean, we had a car that barely couldn't enter into Q2. Sometimes if we were really lucky with the weather and it was wet and we got the right lap in the right window, we managed to make it into Q3 maybe once, but we didn't have a car to be in the points. And we made it to the points. We were the first car to score points without the DRS. In that period of time, it was called the F duct.
Yeah,
So we had a car without an F duct, and we were the only team scoring points without an F duct. Um, how did Helmut Marko, Franz Tost, Christian, all these, I guess, the board of Red Bull uh, judged our performance? Well, I don't know actually, because we didn't have me and Sebastian Buemi back in the day had our references were each other, and we didn't have a winning car like Sebastian Vettel did. Maybe what his car was not a winning car, but at least was a car that was always in Q3 with Bourdais.
yeah, yeah,
And you could actually see that, the average of qualifying was always in Q3. So we had a team that was its second year building a car in Faenza in Italy. So it was the first year and the second year. Then we were out, and then you get into Red Bull. At that time, Vettel won 4 titles in a row. Of course, we knew that car had way much more downforce than our car, at least 150 points of downforce more,
really.
much more grip. And every time we step in the simulator, we were at least 1.5 second faster, which was incredible. And then you were like, oh, am I a hero now? Who would know? And it was, yeah, very frustrating, very frustrating. I'm not saying me or Sebastian Buemi would have been world champions at all, because you never know. Jules Bianchi, he was one of our best friends and a great, amazing driver. He could never show his potential with a racing car, because I mean with a Formula One car, because he just didn't have the right tool to show. And that's why it was, maybe now it's very different, because now the whole pack and the whole grid is so close that back in the day you were P17, 2 seconds off pole position. And now you would be P17 just maybe 8 tenths, 1 second off. So things got much more interesting now in order to show driver ability and human skill.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I was, yeah, curious about the very start. Like, it's not like you hear about a football player being aware of, oh, there's a big scout from Barcelona in the crowd. You have to play extra well today. It's not like you're in a Formula Renault race and you're aware that Helmut Marco's there. And I guess when you're
Yeah.
starting for so young, what was that process like? First hearing of Red Bull's interest, and what do you think attracted them to you, maybe? And also, what would have been clear with Max as well?
Helmut Marko, and I guess every single junior team program now in Formula One, or at least I would say the smartest out there, would look for young talent doing unnatural things from the very beginning. When you have a very young driver doing unnatural things, and when I say unnatural things, I would say like just coming from karting, getting into a Formula or single seater car, and straight away winning races or being in the top. That's something that you see and that you don't normally see. And when you see that, you want to make sure that you get this driver for your junior program. Because if you see this 15 or 16-year-old kid that doesn't have any experience, gets into a single seater and beats already people that have been there for like 2 or 3 years driving this racing car, this is something special. So you have an eye on this. Plus, you know, that was the case with Max. That was probably also the case with me. I did the driver selection in Portugal, and I did my second year. Well, my second year single seater was in Formula 3, British Formula 3. I won on my first year. So I guess that when you have a very young driver winning championships right from the beginning, it's because it's something special. So that's why you would promote this driver to more testing, more experience, and of course you want to make him to Formula One as soon as possible. And that was the case with Antonelli, for example, which I think is doing brilliant so far.
Yeah, yeah. And it's I guess as well, looking back at the start, I've read what you said about Helmut Marco in other interviews. Obviously, he's a big subject at the moment, and talks about they like to put pressure on the drivers. Do you think, because of the struggles at the moment in the second team, do you think maybe the method of putting too much pressure on drivers has changed? I just think, for as an example, to use a football example again, I remember Jose Mourinho saying when he started, you could put pressure on kids in the dressing room and they would respond, whereas now people are a bit more sensitive to things. Do you think that might be part of what's changed? Why they're not getting such a
I
quick?
don't think Helmut have changed at all,
Yeah. Okay.
at all, and I don't think he will
What
never.
do you think he needs to in that regard?
I think the world has changed.
Yeah.
I think Formula One has changed, but I think Helmut Marko hasn't changed and he won't change. He has no interest of changing. To be honest, I don't think people change much, and especially old people.
Sure, yeah.
Um, and I think things have worked for Red Bull so far and for Helmut. I'm not sure if it'll work for the next 10 years in terms of having this method or this mindset into drivers whatsoever. But I have to say, in regards to that Helmut Marko made my life. He was my university, and I I'm not his friend, but I don't regret that he put me so much pressure into me because he made me stronger. Like we didn't have a friendship relationship because we didn't have to, but he kind of put me that he put me into that zone where I remember those days in 2008 in British Formula 3 where I was just fighting for the championship into the last race at Donington Park, and he literally called me before the weekend. And that phone call wasn't a support call. It was actually a threatening call. And he actually said, if you don't win the championship, you're out of the program. So that was the end of my career.
Wow.
And it was a 1 minute call, and I won the championship. Then I got into Formula One the next year. So the window of being a hero and getting it lost in Red Bull is that big. It's that short. And maybe that's also the window in life.
Yeah.
For us drivers, we didn't have these studies going into uni, and our university is racing, is competition. And Helmut Marko probably was the best professor that anybody could have because he prepares you through your adolescence. Like when I was 15, 16, 17, 18, the only thing I kind of breathe in and eat was racing, motor racing, and it was through Helmut Marko. And that level of discipline and that level of mindset got into my kind of life. I'm making music now, and probably I apply different methods that I've learned while I was in the Red Bull Junior team and in Formula One. I have to be very thankful because without them, I would have never made it into Formula One. Unfortunately, I don't think it was fair the way it ended up at all. At all, it was definitely not a sporting decision, but it's the way it is, and I'm here now, and I keep on going and moving forward. But I have to say, Helmut Marko at the moment maybe could kind of learn some things that he could avoid. And I think Formula One and the FIA should penalize some of the comments because you can be tough and you can be very disciplined or whatsoever, but you can't be offensive to cultures, to religions, and to whole countries. It's penalized in football, it's penalized in many sports, and it should be penalized in Formula One for the good, and for the image of F1. This has to be a transparent sport, and we all develop as human beings and sports and athletes and teams. So this has to be clean and fair. So, there's this balance. So as I said, I do defend Helmut Marko in a way, but in another way, I would criticize some of the comments and aspects of him, of course.
Yeah, no, and I feel like I've read other Red Bull Junior drivers say similar, that it was so beneficial to them. But I guess now, like you're saying, the world's changed a bit, and you have to be a bit more sensitive to people. And I guess one thing which made headlines was the Isaac Hadjar getting emotional in Australia, and he called it embarrassing. Obviously, he got quite criticised for that in the media, but like you say, he's probably not going to change his opinion. He's probably not going to stop doing it, is he?
You see what happened to Hadjar, and you see two different reactions from two different people. You see Anthony Hamilton, and then you see Helmut Marko. Anthony had no interest on this kid, just that he just personally felt so bad for him, and he went to support him, and he gave him his love and support as a dad. He felt like that his dad, and he just say, "Come on, man, you'll come up from this." And this is what you want to hear. You want to hear that somebody believes in you and says, "Just don't worry, keep it up. You'll come back out of this." And this is the way to move forward, thinking positive and optimistic. Then you have the other side being evil and just laughing at you, which is the way that Helmut Marko has performed and is well known by doing that. And I don't think it's the way to behave, because, come on, it's quite natural and expected that you can be emotional in this certain situation. He made a huge mistake. It was actually not that difficult to make it. As you could see, other experienced drivers made that mistakes in a very similar circumstance. So it kind of can happen. It's not the best way to end up your first Grand Prix, of course, but you have to have a little bit of left hand, and understand the situation.
Yeah, yeah. And how involved are they in the selection? You talked about your exit. I remember you were linked with Lotus in 2012. Is that true? And how do you look back on your exit? Is it a phone call from?
Well, I declined. I declined an offer contract that was offered to me just for a weekend for the whole season in 2012. The only thing is that I didn't have time to sign this contract because they were making me sign it right at that time. And I regret it because I thought Red Bull was my home and they were my people and they were my family since 2005. And the reason why I didn't sign it was because the season was going really well. We were beating, world champions, better teams than us, with more infrastructure, with more budget. I was beating my teammate, and I never thought they were going to get rid of both drivers at the end of the season. So that's the reason why I didn't sign this contract, because I was expecting to move on into the bigger team. But yeah, life is life.
Yeah. And another thing I was interested, don't know if something you've thought about in a while, but a colleague of mine mentioned in Korea, you and Helmut had an argument during practice with Vettel.
Yeah.
Was that like, because I guess most people don't stand up to him. Was that quite a liberating experience?
Helmut has a very, probably also his physical image is quite scary for a lot of drivers and people,
and reporters.
and reporters, but he shouldn't scare you. He's an old Austrian man with a lot of experience and knowledge into racing or whatever. But come on, man, just stand up if you think you have a point. And I did have a point. And I tell you, and I can explain to you right now what happened. Sebastian Vettel was already world champion in Korea. He could leave. He could go home and not race for that weekend. Nothing would change. He was already world champion. We were fighting with Sauber for constructors position. And I remember the whole Friday started, like, we had rain on Friday and we couldn't test on the dry. So we had FP3 on Saturday, and we had the very last moments of FP3 on the dry. We wanted to test for 5-6 laps with a full tank. And I remember we went out and I had Vettel in my back. He missed the first corner. I let him by because obviously, Toro Rosso had orders of whenever you see a Red Bull car, you just let him by as soon as possible without, making any trouble for them. And I obviously attended those rules. I let him by. Then he missed the apex of turn one. He went straight. I started lap one. There was 4 minutes remaining of the session left before qualifying. And then he catch me back. Of course, he had a much better and faster car and with no fuel. So I let him by, ruining my lap again. Then he goes straight into turn one again. Once more, there was 2 minutes remaining of the clock. He gets me again, and I decided not to let him by this time. I decided to at least do one clean lap in a free practice, considering that he was already world champion, that he had already his career done, and we were actually struggling in that time. So it was a free practice session. I decided to go for the last lap. And then he obviously started yelling at me in the radio. And the next thing I knew is just when I'm back in the pits, I find Helmut Marco's face yelling at me and Franz Tost and the whole team saying that this is not acceptable, this is not acceptable. He would never actually listen at me and let me explain him that I led him by already twice and that he missed the breaking point twice. Yeah. And whatever is a free practice, he's world champion already. And come on, like, let's not make this drama bigger. I understand the situation, but, you have to understand the circumstances that this happened. Anyway, I finished P7 on Sunday. It was a great race. I would say we passed Nico Rosberg in the last lap. We made good points, and then everything was solved. We hugged each other. Me and Helmut. Everything was good again. So I know many people would think that this was the reason why I was sacked, but it was not. I don't think it was that. Okay. So yeah, that's the whole story of that weekend.
Yeah. And is the departure of Franz Tost, do you think that plays a part? Was he ever, like we use the phrase in English, good cop, bad cop? Was he the guy who would be there when Helmut or Horner were a struggle, or was he more in the background?
No, I think Franz tried to do the best job he could. He's also a very strict, disciplined man, and he was a workaholic, which was great because the team needed some push, and he was always pushing everyone. Good was never enough, excellence was never enough, and Franz was always trying to get over that. But we had a problem, we just didn't have the aero of the car working in the best possible way. But also it's normal, it's tough. Formula One, it's difficult. Look at Aston Martin, even with the best resources, you just need time sometimes, and you need the right engineering, you need the right wind tunnel, you need the right team. And when you have your first year of building the car in your factory, and then you don't have a wind tunnel and things like that, it's very tough to compete against the rest, of course.
Looking at you mentioned Aston Martin there, just thinking about your time in F1, you raced against some unbelievable drivers. I think Hamilton, Alonso, Schumacher as well, no? So it's
yeah, Michael.
Yeah, I
raced a lot against Michael because at that time Mercedes were not competitive. They were fighting with us for position. They had a slightly better car than us, but many times we were fighting for positions. Yeah.
What was that like? Was that quite shocking?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I had a lot of chats with Michael that time, and I remember that race in Australia where I kept him for like 40 laps back in my back, and he was great. He was super tough to fight with. He's an excellent driver and human, and I've learned a lot. He was my hero when I was young, and definitely I've learned a lot from him in F1 and after F1, of course.
He give you some advice as well then? He's that kind of person he wants
to improve. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What kind of thing?
So straight ahead and so so perfectionist and like a great athlete. He would be my model, my role model as a person, and especially as a racing driver, as a professional.
because he was so professional. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
very.
And just looking a bit more as well, I was interested about your post career, the DJing as well. How's that going? What was the transition like? Was it something you wanted to do whilst you were in Formula One as well?
Well, music was my hobby since very young. My parents went to Ibiza in 1975, and I was kind of born there, and I made all my life, all my summers going to Ibiza, made all my friends there. Electronic music was the thing, is the thing right now. It's always been the thing in Ibiza. And I remember we had this basement with turntables and a mixer, and my friends were buying records, and I was kind of curious of what was that. And we were throwing parties sometimes with our friends. I was not allowed on clubs, so sometimes, I was getting on the deck. So I started and I started to understand how to play and mix. And then I started to buy records, and we were kind of compete against each other to show which had the best or the most better or
Okay.
the most efficient tune out of the party. And then we exchanged music. We started exchanging music and finding and digging for music, which was great. Back in the day was actually much more difficult to find music, especially because you had to go to a record store and dig for hours and so on. Now it's very different. And then after a while, I started to produce music. I remember I downloaded Ableton Live on my computer. I started to make a few tracks, started to send it to very small record labels, and started to release music, house music, which is my pure love. And now I still do the same thing. I make music on my laptop. I have a bigger studio with some hardware and synths, which I love, and I spend every single day there, which it makes me feel so complete. I don't know. I guess people that make art would understand what it's that. I mean, racing in Formula One, it's great, and driving a Formula One car, it's amazing, but just creating something out of nowhere and creating a feeling and something that maybe you know people love and feel connected to, it's something blow minding, and it's out of any dimension. And when you go to a club or a festival, it doesn't matter how many people dance it, but if someone in the dance floor feels it, or you see a DJ playing your tune, you see that kind of respect and feeling of love and community that I never felt in racing or in sports or in individual sport, let's say.
And it seems like it's maybe a little bit more common as well, drivers having something to get away from Formula One. Lando Norris has been trying DJing, and a lot of the drivers say they like playing golf because it's so different.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
Leclerc and Hamilton have tried their hand at music as well. Do you think that is quite a healthy thing, I guess?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you need to fulfill your life with whatever you love.
Yeah.
And if you have the chance to live from something that you love, you're already a privileged. And we are very, very, very privileged because we do what we love. And if you can spend some time by doing that, it's just about getting the maximum out of the present, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And Formula One, even though now safety is great, you know it's still it's a still risk. You still go to incredible high speeds, and you still risk. And for me, there should be an interest culturally for every single racing driver out of Formula One. This
Yeah.
is what makes you human and what makes you person. Whether it's a sport, or whether it's, I don't know, making wine or reading books or producing music, whatever you do. I think it's great that you have something to crave for and to feel fulfilled, not just what you've done since you were 8 years old in a racetrack.